most of us will agree that data integrity is a pretty hot topic. So lucky for us, we have Head of Strategy, Michael Leppitsch, to help demystify this one with the Send data pipeline automation as a backbone. Michael will show you how to organize and implement an actionable framework that delivers truly trustworthy data to the business while avoiding complexity and unnecessary costs. Hi, Michael. Welcome.
Hey, how are you guys?
Hey, doing good. How are you doing?
Good, good. Super excited. Glad to be here. You know, this is a once-a-year event, and we try to bring all the best together for everybody. So yeah, let's do this.
All right, take it away.
Yeah, so for today's topic, we're actually previewing a white paper that's going to be coming out very, very shortly on data integrity. And we have a specific perspective on this, but let's take a step back and talk about why data integrity actually matters. And if I can get, there we go. Well, it really matters because all business is becoming data-driven, right? And so this data is increasingly interwoven across the business, and we're just seeing more and more sources of data, all kinds of sources, right? Transactional systems, databases, data lakes, APIs, even equipment, shipped products that are talking back to us, supply chain partners, external sources, and all these sources of data are kind of operational systems. But the decisions for the business are actually made on analytics, right? On data that is assembled and put together specifically to answer certain questions like KPIs that drive dashboards for business units, feed reports, business intelligence, people doing research and analytics on where the company should go next and what the markets are. And then even increasingly, we'll see more and more modeling, right? Machine learning, forecasting using ML and AI. And so these endpoints of data where these decisions are made, there's a kind of a difference between the space, a gap between these two systems. And we want the system on the right, this decision data, to be just as trustworthy as the raw data in the source systems that are running our day-to-day business. Where a customer is a customer and a shipping address is a shipping address. And invoices are invoices. That is hard, trustworthy data that we're running the business with. We want to trust our analytics data and our decision data the same way. And so this looks pretty simple, right? But we all know, we're all here to talk about data pipelines. We know that the space in between those two, the data moving from left to right here, is actually a bit of a black art, right? There's pipelines, there's APIs, there's file transfers, there's bespoke code, there's platforms, there's lots and lots of tools, third-party tools. And so really, this problem actually gets even more complex when you think about the data mesh, right? Within a company, what we just saw is actually a microcosm that happens within each business unit, right? The sales team has sales systems and they have decision data. That's all happening within that business unit. But you have that pattern inside every one of these business units. So not only do you have these this need and this demand for trustworthy data to make decisions within each of these business units, but you're also shipping this data around, and all the business units are collaborating more and more and using each other's data to inform what's going to happen next. And some of this, of course, has already been happening a long time. And integration has, for example, integration between sales and supply chain has already been around for a long time. That integration has been at the domain data level, where a sale order goes to the supply chain management. So for fulfillment, for example, what's new is that increasingly these business units are sharing decision data with each other. And so we just end up with kind of a hodgepodge of different data getting shipped around, and it turns into quite a mess. So let's get back to the topic, though, because it needs to be done, number one, and the data needs to be trustworthy, right? So why don't we talk about data quality? Well, we are talking about data quality, but we're putting it a very specific lens on this. And the reason we're not taking a point of view on data quality is because it's a very crowded space, right? There's a lot of concepts, there's a lot of advice, there's a lot of tools, there's a lot of technology. But what we found when we talked to our customers who are looking to use data quality or actually get trustworthy data out of their pipelines running on Ascend, what they needed is a simple framework to get to trustworthy data. So we kind of anchored on data integrity as a way of talking about how to get trustworthy data so that business can make confident decisions. And the framework we kind of teased out of all this knowledge and insights out there around data quality actually became fairly simple. We found kind of a 4-stage process that lends itself to implementation to deliver trusted data to make confident decisions. And that's what we're going to go through today here. So we're going to go through this step by step. I will say that this is kind of an overview. So we're going to take bites off of this flow from left to right, and we're going to start on the right. So let's talk about what does it mean for data to be valid. And we don't need to make this up. There's lots of folks that have talked about what valid data actually means. And it's basically a category of validations and of checks that are very much at this kind of system at the bits and bytes level of data, right? For example, is the data encoded correctly, right? If you're going to be pulling data out of a file system of invoices, say, is the file that you're getting out of there actually readable? Is it encoded properly? What format is it in? Is it JSON, Parquet, CSV, or is it a table, right? Is it change detection system? Then we're getting into the validity of the schema that's encoded in whatever that payload is. Do we have the right fields? Are the column names correct? Do we have good data types that are going to be recognizable downstream? And of course, always detecting schema drift, having a mechanism to detect when the source system schema changes and being able to intervene when that happens. Is it correctly stored? Do we know where that data is going to be located physically, right? Is it in a file system? Is it in a table? Is it behind an API? So that as we're acquiring the data, are we going to the right place to get the right data? And then this data, usually from transactional systems, is updated all the time, right? So one thing that matters here in terms of validation is what is the correct cadence by which we scan the source system or get the latest files. And there's all sorts of sources there and different kinds of file drops, table updates, et cetera. But that needs to be part of validation for us to just get solid that this data is actually physically computable. So once we have this valid, and we can do this with technology, right? So once the data is valid, the next phase is we actually add some things to valid data. We're going to perform some additional operations, if you will, to get the data to be accurate. And with accuracy, we're looking to get the data ready to be able to use for analytics, for joins, for merges, for filters, for all the business logic we're going to perform on it. And we can do this with some cleaning operations. And so there's 5 categories here. One is just making sure the data is complete, right? Are all the fields and columns there that you're going to need downstream? Do we have all the records? Looking for uniqueness, right? Redundant records are often a problem if you're getting sales information from 2 different sales systems. Is there redundancy there? You might have some fairly complex rules to deduplicate those redundant records. You can't often make them go away because they're coming from 2 different systems, say, but you can have some basic rules and operations that actually perform that deduplication. And then consistency, this is a very specific requirement. Looking at the precision, for example, of numerical data, or making sure that the data is only as it is allowed to appear in terms of a set definition, and other kind of constraints on the data in any of the sources and any of the sets of data that you're getting. And you want to eliminate those kind of problems by filtering or replacement, right? Again, there's these operations you can perform here to get the data to be consistent. And then reconciling is the next level beyond that. It's actually reconciling different data sources against each other. right? If you're pulling a sales record set and it has customer IDs in it, you might need to do a cross-check to your master data, make sure that customer ID actually exists, right, before you include it in a sales report. So there's some business rules that start to get into this part of the conversation. What does it mean to reconcile this data so you can actually perform these analytics and generate data products out of it? And then finally, scanning is actually, there's a lot of tools out there that actually do scanning. What we're talking about here is scanning the data to identify outliers, right? You might have some rules about data is an outlier when it's beyond a third sigma, or when it's, when it's just physically an impossible value. So again, filtering is a very common way of setting the data, the rules by which you're going to filter the data based on scans. So the scanning is kind of a separate thing, very common in the data quality world, but it's one part of what happens here to get the data to be accurate. All right, so let's say we've got accurate data now. We've performed these operations. We're ready to actually perform business insight on it. And we'll call this stage reliable, right? So here's a couple more things to actually process this data for the business context. And here, this is very business-centric, right? You actually need to know what the context is and what the analytic is that you're going to be delivering. So what we're going to focus on here is a couple of patterns that you want to apply as you're performing those operations. And the first one is shift left. You may have already run across this term. We see that in data quality increasingly. Is you want to apply to operations, whether they're filtering or merging or joining. You want to perform those operations as early in that life cycle as possible, right? Because you're increasingly removing error from the data. And so the earlier you do that, the better. And that's what we've done with these 4 stages, by the way. We've basically shifted left as many of those operations as possible to drive this data integrity delivery mechanism. And here, the relevance of data is actually super important. You want to make sure that you're only moving data through your pipelines or through this process of making the data trustworthy if that data is going to be relevant to the business, right, to the decision-making process. You want to make sure that all the needed data is present. And you also want to make sure that the business logic that's implemented in this processing is actually implemented correctly, right? So this relevancy is pretty important. We'll see that pop up in another way a little bit later. And so what happens, you can see that there's often multi-step processing that happens in the data as it's performing these analytics, but that processing needs to be done without errors, right? So this is no longer source system compute. This is like data compute. And you want to be able to self-audit that this reliable data stays reliable, right? So you actually detect and auto-correct for failures and for errors. That you notify engineering if there's actually a problem you can't resolve, right? You detect a problem in the data that indicates that it's not reliable, notify engineering, and then also make it super easy for engineering to intervene and fix the error, right? You don't want to have to stop pipelines for weeks on end to fix something. You want to make it super easy for engineers to intervene, fix, and get it back up and running, because that contributes to the trustworthiness of the data, right? Let's not forget what this is all about. And then this final one, this is the point where you actually need business participation, right? And so we talk about data ownership or data stewardship here. What we're talking about is actually having a business person participate and drive the definitions that actually, that define what reliable data is. The first 2 stages are very technical, right? If you remember, they're very engineering-centric. Data engineers or software developers can handle those. This is the part where you actually need a business person to participate in. Like, what does this mean? What does weather mean? What does bad data mean? Good data mean? What's a large customer? What's a small customer? Like, those are all business conversations that are happening and are being embedded in this code. And they're the ones, so as they participate, they're actually the ones that sponsor the trust in the data, right? So we're introducing this human notion of other people, business people, trusting another human who is involved in the process of defining what reliable is, right? And so this is a super important vector for trust, is to have this data steward in place. And you'll see this is something that's talked about all over data quality methodology, but this is where it fits here, right? In our methodology, it drops right into this defining the reliable data. Okay, cool. So we have useful, reliable data that's ready for business to use and make decisions. So what's missing? So this is the part where we're going to do a little bit of auditing around the process, right? And this is kind of a catch-all, but you want to actually make sure that these systems are in place. This isn't, few of these are actually things in this step, in this trustworthy step, are things that you're going to do at the end of your process. These are things that are happening throughout the process. But if an audit is done, these are the things you want to check the boxes on. Number one, that the data has been secure throughout this whole process, right? The company has control over the full data lifecycle, encryption, transmission of data, and access are all secure. The data is observable. All these processes are observable. That any of the platforms that touch the data and are monitored and track their operation and generate logs, right? Super important part of observable is that the lineage of the data is traced throughout this process end to end, right? So that you can go back and audit. 6 weeks ago when we had a sales report, what was that data? And you want to be able to go back and have a bulletproof lineage tracing and know end to end what data was used, how was it used, and if there was problems with it, be able to pinpoint exactly where that problem was, so that going forward you can make that data trustworthy. And then also searchability and cataloging is also actually a part of this here. That is an important part of what your data steward is going to help you do, is to make sure that these data products at the end here are properly tagged. The people who find them are using business terminology to find them. Timeliness is super important. This gets back to shift left, right? Making sure you're processing any of these processes as early as possible, because if you have a problem, you want to know that as early as possible. You don't want to know that your data product is bad when a business starts making decisions with it. You want to detect it soon and as early as possible. And here's another one, actually, that's important for timeliness, which is whenever possible, you actually want to process data continuously, right, in small batches. So if you're looking at doing like a month-end report on your sales process, maybe that's actually a daily process where you're taking each day's data and aggregating it, and then by the time you're running your month-end report, all the data's there, right? You're only waiting for the last day. So this timeliness includes this incrementality and running these processes in batches. The other thing about trustworthiness is actually it needs to be used by the business, right? You want to track and log what data is the business actually using, and how are they using it? What kind of decisions are they making with it? And if there's data product lying around that nobody's using, you want to detect that and deprecate it, right? It's costing you money. You're processing it. You've invested in it, but nobody's using it. You want to get to the bottom of it and potentially deprecate it and take it out of the equation. So this business impact of data-driven decisions provides the feedback loop to make that data trustworthy, right? If your colleagues are already trusting that data to make decisions, it means, and there's a data steward sitting behind it, and all these trustworthy check boxes are checked, you're going to increase the trustworthiness and the value of that data to the business. And then finally, at the bottom, this is the part where, data pipelines are messy. All these data processes are messy. So you want the systems that you're using to perform this data integrity, driving these data integrity stages, to self-monitor, to raise alerts and notifications, and to do that smartly, right? Not just logs that nobody reads, but actually smart alerts that involves the engineer to resolve the problems, right? Going back to the previous step. And then there's no backlog of unresolved problems. That makes the data super trustworthy. If I'm using a data product and there's no pending errors on it, there's no interventions needed, that raises the value of it and my ability to trust that data. Okay, so let's bring it together, right? Obviously, we've been talking about data pipelines, right? I hope that that's landed. To drive this process to generate trustworthy data for the business to be able to make confident decisions. And now let's talk about what intelligent pipelines are, and connect the dots back to why we're talking about that here at Ascend. First of all, intelligent data pipelines can drive data integrity because, right, number one, there are sequential life cycle steps, right? These 4 stages, each one of these stages probably has a lot of steps within it. But data pipelines are inherently sequential life cycle steps, right? You can organize your operations in a pipeline and back it up with the automation to run those processes. Pipelines also do really well for shift left processing, right? In particular, using the Ascend platform, a lot of the initial technical validation in the first stage and the valid stage is actually built right into the platform, right? It checks for cadence, it checks for data types, it checks for schemas, right? Those are all capabilities that are right in the platform. So it allows you to shift left a lot of the processing and drive it with the platform itself. And the thirdly is that intelligent pipelines on Ascend in particular do well when there's a platform that is automating these processes, right? These 4 stages. And let's talk about what some of these automation can provide. And hopefully we're connecting the dots back now to the requirements at each of these steps, right? Number one, built-in monitoring, right? A platform that self-monitors, tries to self-correct, does reruns automatically, finds problems automatically, that checks the boxes for a lot of these steps, for a lot of these specific steps within each of these stages that help you deliver trustworthy data. Built-in alerting, right? Making sure that yes, you can connect to another alerting system, but the alert itself is generated within the platform. Built-in lineage, right? Making sure that the system itself end-to-end has no seams, from ingestion to the ETL, through the transforms, through the final delivery of the data product, and as a trusted data set, as a trusted data product. You've got this lineage back to back, and you can go back and audit it anytime, and you can see it actually live, real time. You can trust that data because you can actually see this lineage operate. Built-in filtering, so you can apply these different. We saw filters show up several times here in each of these 4 stages. So you want to be able to apply filters anywhere in your process, right? At ingestion or at the very end, to apply these rules that make the data trustworthy. And then these built-in validations, which sometimes take the form of fairly sophisticated business logic, right? Maybe you need to encode them in Python, maybe in SQL. But these business-oriented validations are pretty important. And all of this needs to be driven by an orchestration, right? Obviously. And so having that orchestration actually be built in right into the platform makes these pipelines more and more intelligent, and makes this the case to use intelligent pipelines to deliver data integrity, right? And at the end of the day, being able to do that efficiently using costing mechanisms that are built in a platform that's measuring how much things are cost, how much processing is being used to do these processes, gives you an ROI, right? Because you got the cost side of this, but you get to tie that back to the benefits that are being generated by the business using these data sets, using these data products. And now you can tie those up. You can actually do some cost analysis, whether those data products are worth the processing costs that it takes to make them trustworthy. And then some of the housekeeping in the very last stage, right, to make these trusted. Access controls are super important. You want that in your platform so that there's no backdoors, and lots more, right? We can go on and get more and more specific around Ascend functionality and Ascend functionality running intelligent data pipelines to deliver trusted data to your business unit so that they can make confident decisions, right? And so the punchline here, of course, is that Ascend data pipeline automation is specifically capable and uniquely positioned to be able to drive this kind of process and do it while meeting all these requirements that we just went through to get the data to be trustworthy. So that's it. This is pretty quick, but let's open it for Q&A.
Perfect. All right, let's see what we got here. So first question is going to be, we use data quality tools that identify statistical outliers. How do you integrate these with this approach?
Yeah, so you're talking about that step that's, I had it under scanned, right? Scanning, where you're scanning your data and you're looking for outliers. That is actually a pretty important part of data quality. Quality control is often a statistical process. And there's tools out there that do that, right? Ascend is not specialized on that. We're specialized on the pipeline piece. So what we've seen folks do is to actually invoke scanning tools on data sets in the pipeline that's being run on Ascend. And that's super easy to do. You can do that within a particular processing step. We call them transforms. You can actually perform a scanning operation. That scanning operation can produce data in its own right. Right, outliers, what are your barriers, what are your limits that you want to set up? And then you can feed those kind of parameters into the filtering subsequently in the pipeline. So that's a really good way to integrate these scanning platforms and statistical analysis platforms, and actually get the feedback that they generate about your data, put that right back into the process to generate trustworthy data. So it's not just off to the side somewhere and somebody looks at it at the end of the week. This is something that can be tied in real time.
Cool. So along the lines of trustworthy data, sometimes this question is related to knowing when data is actually the right stuff. So the question is, our IT teams are missing the intuition to know when data coming in just doesn't quite look right. So how can we teach them the nuances of what trustworthy data looks like?
Yeah, this one's super interesting. This came from a conversation that we had with one of our customers who actually started their data team with business analysts, right? People who know the data. And they know what customer looks like. They know what sales looks like. They know what a click stream looks like down to the bits, down to the bits and bytes, but certainly down to the field level. So having those folks participate in this entire process, I know we talked about the data steward, right? The data steward is actually a key element to answering this question. But you can actually have data analysts be part of the data team, be part of the IT team, whose job it is, they often house the data engineers or the actual, delivery functions for data pipelines. So augmenting those teams with and empowering these business folks is the best way to do that. And we have, customers that specifically have started data teams this way. So there's proof, and that's working really well for them. And then the best practice around the data steward is kind of adds on top of that. So you want the business involved pretty much throughout the whole process here.
Cool. All right. Last question. Our engineering teams build a separate pipeline for each report to avoid cascading errors. How do we get the result of different pipelines to stop conflicting with each other?
Yeah, that's a good one, right? That often happens when each pipeline is launched as its own project. And the IT team goes and delivers it. They go to the source system, get the data, they build the pipeline, and then deliver the data product, whatever form that takes. And they don't talk to each other, right? So that is a very common scenario. I'm sure a lot of folks on joining us here today are familiar with that. When you introduce some automation to deliver trustworthy data through these pipeline mechanisms, and you have a strategy kind of end to end, where do you add the value? Where do you kind of uplift your data from validated to reliable to trustworthy, right? Then those are good schemes where you can start to reuse data, right? So weather data, for example, that has gone through the validation process, the bits and bytes are right, it's in the right file system, et cetera, where to get that data. And at that point, you can start using that data down multiple pipelines. Or you can go one step further. You can go past stage 2, where you know, like your fields are right, your columns are correct, your data types are good, right? You've got a lot of kind of data level validations set. You don't need to do that twice in two different places, right? You can do that once. And from then, like the business logic, and this is actually where the real differentiation happens between different requests for different data, right? One person wants to use the data to forecast supply chain logistics, how many trucks should be staged where, for example. And another one was to project sales with it, depending on data. So you can take that data as late as possible down these stages, and only fork your pipelines for the business part at the very end. And that's going to remove a lot of the sources of error between pipelines that have otherwise been doing this in parallel and doing this over and over. By the way, there's another huge benefit for this, and that's cost reduction, right? Some of these operations, for example, scanning data, that's pretty expensive, or reformatting data, et cetera. Some of these operations can be pretty heavy. So you want to just do that once. You want to incur that cost just once. I would just add to that your data stewards become part of the conversation, right? So your data steward for the sales data forecast might be a different data steward from the logistics and truck staging forecast, say, right? And so they need to agree that this shared weather data, which is kind of a data product in its own right? And we talk about that elsewhere. Actually, in fact, I'm going to talk about that tomorrow in the session. That interim data product, this weather data, is something that they need to agree on. They both need to say, yeah, this is the weather data I'm going to use. Let's use it for both of our forecasts. And that now you have business behind, right? It's not just IT or engineers. It's actually the business agreeing that that is the reliable data, that's a trustworthy data to use going forward for these forecasts. And that will also help close the gaps that are otherwise kind of really hard to find. If you're getting data pipelines saying different things to different people, that's really hard to get to the bottom of.
Great. So I think that wraps up all of our questions. Thank you so much, Michael. This was really great. Look forward to seeing you. Said you're talking again tomorrow on another session?
Yep. I'm going to talk about data products tomorrow with Alex. Looking forward to that conversation. And then we'll have a paper coming out on data integrity shortly. So keep your eyes peeled for that.